You spend 10 minutes apologizing to a chair you just bumped into. You have full conversations with your dog, not baby talk. Actual conversations where you pause and wait for them to respond. You name your plants, you talk to your car when it won't start, you say sorry to your phone when you drop it. And sometimes, late at night, you catch yourself having entire debates with yourself out loud, playing both sides with such conviction that you forget for a moment that you're alone. And maybe, just maybe, you've wondered if this makes you a little strange, a little broken, a little too far gone into your own head. But here's what nobody tells you. These behaviors, these little quirks that you hide from the world, that you laugh off when someone catches you mid-conversation with an inanimate object, they're not signs that you're losing it. They're signs that your brain is doing exactly what it was designed to do. They're proof that you're human in the most beautiful, complex, and perfectly imperfect way. Your mind is a universe of patterns and connections, of survival mechanisms and coping strategies that have been refined over millions of years of evolution. And these things you do, these supposedly weird habits, they're actually windows into how incredibly sophisticated your psychological machinery really is. So before you judge yourself one more time for saying thank you to the ATM or having a heart-to-heart with your houseplant, let me take you on a journey through 30 fascinating facts about human behavior that will make you realize something profound. You're not weird. You're not broken. You're not too much or too sensitive or too anything. You're just deeply, wonderfully, complicatedly human. And every single one of these behaviors has a reason, a purpose, a story written into the very fabric of who you are. Let's start with why you talk to things that can't talk back, because this is where most people feel the most self-conscious. When you have a conversation with your dog, your plant, your stuffed animal from childhood, or even objects like your car or your computer, you're engaging in something psychologists call anthropomorphism, which is the human tendency to attribute human characteristics, emotions, and intentions to non-human entities. And this isn't a bug in your programming. It's a feature. Your brain is wired to seek connection, to find patterns, to create relationships even where none technically exist. Because for most of human history, your ability to read intentions, to predict behavior, to understand the minds of others, was the difference between survival and extinction. So your brain got really, really good at seeing agency everywhere, at projecting consciousness onto the world around you. And it doesn't just turn that off when you're alone with a ficus. When you talk to your dog, you're not being silly. You're exercising the same neural pathways that allow you to empathize with other humans, to build social bonds, to regulate your own emotions through connection. Studies have shown that people who talk to their pets report lower levels of stress, higher feelings of companionship, and better emotional regulation than those who don't. Your dog doesn't need to understand every word for the conversation to matter. The act of speaking, of organizing your thoughts into language, of expressing yourself to a listening presence, even if that presence is a wagging tail and unconditional love, that act alone is therapeutic. And when you apologize to inanimate objects, when you say sorry to the chair you bumped or the door you walked into, you're demonstrating something called excessive empathy, or hyperempathy, which is actually correlated with higher emotional intelligence. Your brain is so finely tuned to avoiding harm and maintaining social harmony that it extends those impulses beyond the social sphere into your physical environment. You're not crazy, you're considerate to a fault. And while the chair doesn't care, the fact that your first instinct is to apologize rather than to curse or ignore shows that you've internalized kindness so deeply that it's become reflexive. This is the same mechanism that makes you feel guilty when you don't water your plants. The same one that makes you feel bad for the stuffed animal that fell behind the bed. The same one that makes you treat objects with a gentleness that other people might not understand. And here's the beautiful part. This tendency, this spillover of empathy into the inanimate world, it means that when you interact with actual people, with beings who can feel and hurt and need, your capacity for care is even greater. You've been practicing compassion on everything around you, and that makes you better at human connection, not worse. Now let's talk about why you talk to yourself, because this is where the shame really lives for a lot of people. You have conversations with yourself, sometimes out loud, sometimes in your head, and they can be about anything. Replaying a conversation from earlier and thinking of all the things you should have said. Planning out a difficult discussion before it happens. Working through a problem by literally talking yourself through each step. Giving yourself a pep talk before a challenge. Scolding yourself for a mistake. And society has taught you to hide this, to feel embarrassed if someone overhears, to worry that talking to yourself is a sign of loneliness or instability. But research in psychology has shown the exact opposite. Self-talk, especially out loud, is one of the most effective cognitive tools humans have for problem-solving, emotional regulation, and self-motivation. When you verbalize your thoughts, you're not just thinking, you're engaging multiple areas of your brain simultaneously. The language centers, the auditory processing centers, the executive function regions that handle planning and decision-making. You're essentially giving your brain more bandwidth to work with, more ways to process and organize information. And this leads to better outcomes in almost every cognitive task. There's a study that demonstrates this beautifully. Researchers asked participants to find objects in a supermarket, and they split them into two groups. One group was instructed to search silently. The other was told to repeat the name of the object out loud while searching. The group that talked to themselves found the items significantly faster. Why? Because saying the word activates a richer, more detailed mental representation of what you're looking for. Your brain doesn't just think cereal, it hears cereal. It connects that sound to memories of what cereal boxes look like, where they're usually located, what brands you recognize, and all of that happens in milliseconds, creating a cognitive advantage that silent searching doesn't provide. So when you talk yourself through a problem, when you narrate your own life like you're the protagonist in a movie, when you have full-blown arguments with yourself where you play every role, you're not losing your mind, you're using one of the most sophisticated cognitive strategies available to you. You're being your own therapist, your own coach, your own problem-solving partner, and that's not weird. That's adaptive intelligence. Here's another fact that might surprise you. People who cry easily, who tear up at movies or commercials or songs or even just random moments of beauty, they're not weaker than others. They're actually experiencing a higher level of emotional processing. Crying is one of the ways your nervous system regulates overwhelming emotion. And the fact that you access tears more readily means your emotional activation threshold is more sensitive, which correlates with higher empathy, greater emotional awareness, and better long-term mental health outcomes. We're taught to see crying as a loss of control, as something to be ashamed of. But in reality, crying is control. It's your body knowing exactly what it needs to do to restore equilibrium, to process what you're feeling, to release the neurochemical buildup that comes with strong emotions. People who suppress tears, who pride themselves on never crying, they're not stronger. They're just storing that emotional data differently, often in ways that lead to chronic stress, anxiety, and physical health problems down the line. So if you're someone who cries at the drop of a hat, who feels everything so intensely that it spills out through your eyes, you're not too sensitive, you're exactly sensitive enough, and your body is doing its job perfectly. And speaking of sensitivity, let's talk about why certain sounds make you irrationally angry. If you've ever wanted to scream when you hear someone chewing loudly, tapping a pen, sniffling, or making any kind of repetitive noise, you might have something called misophonia, which literally means hatred of sound. And this isn't just you being uptight or irritable. It's a legitimate neurological condition where specific sounds trigger an intense emotional response, usually anger or disgust, and it activates the same part of your brain that responds to actual threats. For people with misophonia, the sound of chewing isn't just annoying. It's processed by the brain as danger, as something that needs to be escaped or eliminated immediately. This happens because of an overconnection between the auditory cortex and the limbic system, which is the emotional center of your brain. So sounds that other people barely notice become amplified into something almost unbearable for you. And if you have this, if you've ever felt like a terrible person because the sound of someone breathing makes you want to leave the room, you need to know that this is not a character flaw. It's a difference in how your brain is wired, and it's more common than you think. You're not mean, you're not intolerant. You're experiencing a genuine physiological response that you have very little control over. And the best thing you can do is understand it, accommodate it when possible, and stop judging yourself for something that lives in your neurology, not your morality. Now here's a behavior that almost everyone does but nobody talks about. You create elaborate scenarios in your head, entire conversations and situations that will probably never happen, and you do this constantly. You imagine confronting someone who wronged you years ago and delivering the perfect comeback. You rehearse asking for a raise and play out every possible response your boss might give. You fantasize about unlikely disasters and plan exactly how you'd survive them. You replay embarrassing moments from your past and imagine different outcomes where you don't humiliate yourself. Psychologists call this mental simulation, and it's one of the most underrated survival tools your brain possesses. When you simulate scenarios, you're essentially running practice drills for your emotional and cognitive systems. You're preparing yourself for possibilities, working through fears, testing out different versions of yourself, and building resilience for situations that may or may not ever occur. This is why athletes visualize their performance before a competition, why public speakers rehearse in their minds, why soldiers run through combat scenarios in training. Mental simulation works because your brain doesn't actually distinguish that much between imagined experience and real experience when it comes to building neural pathways. So when you spend 20 minutes imagining a difficult conversation, you're not wasting time. You're training yourself. You're reducing the anxiety you'll feel if that conversation actually happens, and you're increasing the likelihood that you'll handle it well. But here's where it gets tricky. There's a difference between productive mental simulation and rumination. Productive simulation is future-focused, solution-oriented, and time-limited. You imagine the scenario, you work through it, you feel more prepared, and you move on. Rumination is when you get stuck in loops, when you replay the same fears and anxieties over and over without resolution, when the mental scenarios become a form of self-torture rather than preparation. And if you find yourself ruminating more than simulating, if your mind is a broken record of worst-case scenarios and past regrets, that's not a sign that you're thoughtful or prepared. That's a sign that your anxiety is running the show. And it might be time to interrupt those patterns with therapy, mindfulness practices, or other interventions that can help you redirect that mental energy towards something more constructive. But the baseline behavior, the tendency to imagine and rehearse and plan in your mind, that's not pathological. That's human, and it's actually a sign of intelligence and foresight when it's balanced. Let's shift to something lighter, but equally fascinating. You have a specific side of the bed you prefer, a favorite mug, a particular seat you always choose in a classroom or meeting room, and if someone takes that spot or uses that mug, you feel genuinely unsettled even though rationally you know it doesn't matter. This is called territorial behavior, and it's hardwired into almost every species, including humans. Having consistent spaces and objects gives your brain a sense of control and predictability in a chaotic world, and disrupting those patterns, even in small ways, activates a mild stress response because it signals change, and change from an evolutionary perspective often meant danger. Your favorite mug isn't just a mug, it's a tiny anchor of familiarity in your day, a small piece of your environment that you can predict and control, and when that's taken away, your brain has to expend extra energy adapting to the disruption. This is also why people get so attached to specific routines, why you might feel off if you can't have your coffee at the same time or take your usual route to work. Routine isn't boring, it's regulatory. It frees up your cognitive resources for more important things, because your brain doesn't have to constantly make small decisions about the mundane aspects of your day. Here's another one that might make you feel seen. You struggle to throw things away, even things you know you don't need, because you attach memories and emotions to objects, and letting them go feels like losing a part of yourself. Maybe it's a concert ticket from 10 years ago, a piece of clothing you haven't worn in forever but can't donate because someone special gave it to you, a broken item that you keep meaning to fix but never do. This is called object sentimentality, and it's rooted in the way your brain stores memories. Your memories aren't just abstract data floating around in your head. They're often anchored to sensory experiences, and physical objects serve as powerful retrieval cues for those memories. When you hold that concert ticket, you're not just seeing a piece of paper. You're accessing the entire network of emotions, sights, sounds, and sensations from that night, and your brain doesn't want to lose that access point. The problem is that this can lead to clutter, both physical and emotional, if you don't find a balance between honoring the past and making space for the present. But the impulse itself, the desire to keep pieces of your history close, that's not hoarding unless it becomes dysfunctional. That's just your brain trying to hold on to the experiences that shaped you, and there's something deeply human and understandable about that. Now let's talk about a behavior that feels almost universal, but is rarely discussed. You feel guilty for resting, for doing nothing, for taking time off even when you desperately need it. You've internalized this idea that your worth is tied to your productivity, that rest is something you have to earn, that if you're not constantly achieving or creating or improving, you're wasting your life. And this isn't just a personal failing. This is a cultural sickness, a byproduct of living in a society that worships busyness and equates stillness with laziness. But here's the psychological reality. Rest is not the absence of productivity. It's a different kind of productivity. When you rest, your brain is consolidating memories, processing emotions, strengthening neural connections, and restoring the neurochemical balance that allows you to function. Without adequate rest, your cognitive performance declines, your emotional regulation falters, your physical health deteriorates, and your creativity disappears. So when you feel guilty for resting, you're not hearing the voice of truth. You're hearing the voice of a system that benefits from your exhaustion, and you have to learn to recognize that voice for what it is and reject it. You are not a machine. You are a biological organism with limits and needs, and honoring those needs isn't selfish or weak. It's the only way to sustain yourself for the long term. Here's something that might surprise you about your friendships. You probably have a smaller social circle than you think you should, and you feel guilty about it, like you're not social enough, or not likable enough, or not making enough effort. But research shows that humans can only maintain a limited number of close relationships at any given time, usually between 3 and 5 truly intimate friendships, and maybe 15 to 20 more casual but meaningful connections. This is called Dunbar's number, named after the anthropologist who discovered that primate brain size correlates with social group size. And for humans, the maximum number of stable relationships we can cognitively manage is around 150, with most of those being acquaintances rather than friends. So if you have 2 or 3 people you really trust, really connect with, really show up for, you're not failing at friendship. You're operating exactly within the normal range of human social capacity. The myth that you need a huge friend group, that you should be constantly meeting new people and maintaining dozens of relationships. That's a product of social media distortion and cultural pressure, not psychological reality. Quality over quantity isn't just a nice saying, it's how human bonding actually works. And while we're on the subject of relationships, let's address something that causes a lot of shame. You get intensely attached to people very quickly, or conversely, you struggle to form attachments at all, and both of these patterns make you feel broken. But here's what attachment theory teaches us. The way you bond with others as an adult is largely shaped by the way you bonded with your caregivers as a child. And if those early attachments were inconsistent, neglectful, or chaotic, your adult attachment style is going to reflect that. If you're anxiously attached, if you cling and worry and need constant reassurance, it's because your brain learned early on that love is unpredictable, that closeness can disappear without warning, and so you're always on high alert, always trying to secure the connection before it vanishes. If you're avoidantly attached, if you pull away when people get too close, if you struggle to trust or be vulnerable, it's because your brain learned that depending on others leads to disappointment, that you're safer when you're self-sufficient. And so you built walls to protect yourself from the pain of abandonment. And if you're disorganized, if you swing between desperate closeness and terrified distance, it's because your early experiences taught you that the people who are supposed to love you are also the people who hurt you, and your brain is still trying to reconcile that impossible contradiction. None of these patterns are your fault, but they are your responsibility to understand and work on if you want healthier relationships. Therapy, self-reflection, and conscious relationship choices can help you rewire these patterns over time. But the first step is recognizing that your attachment style isn't a personality flaw. It's an adaptation, and adaptations can change when the environment changes. Let me pause here for a moment because I need to ask you something, and I want you to really think about this. Do you recognize yourself in any of these behaviors? Have you spent years thinking you were strange or broken because of the way you talk to yourself? The way you feel things too deeply? The way you get attached or don't get attached? The way you need routines or struggle to let go of objects or feel guilty for resting? If any of this is resonating with you, if you're feeling that relief of finally being understood, I want you to do something for me. Go down to the comments right now and write this. I'm not weird, I'm human. That's it. Just that sentence. Because when you say it out loud, when you put it into the world, you're not just validating your own experience, you're giving permission to everyone else who's reading to validate theirs too. And I read every single comment, and I want you to know that you're not alone in this, that there's an entire community here of people who feel too much and think too hard and worry about things that don't make sense to worry about, and we're all just trying to figure out how to be human in a world that doesn't always make space for our humanity. So go ahead, comment, and then come back because we're only halfway through and there's so much more to uncover. Now, let's talk about a behavior that almost everyone does but feels deeply ashamed of. You compare yourself to others constantly, scrolling through social media and feeling like everyone else has their life together, while you're barely holding on, seeing other people's successes and feeling like your own accomplishments are insignificant, measuring your worth against impossible standards that you'd never apply to anyone else. And here's the truth about comparison. It's not inherently bad. Humans are social creatures, and we learn by observing others, by benchmarking ourselves against the people around us, by understanding where we fit in the social hierarchy. The problem isn't that you compare. The problem is that you're comparing your messy, complicated, behind-the-scenes reality to everyone else's carefully curated highlight reel, and that's not a fair comparison. Social media has weaponized our natural tendency toward social comparison by giving us unlimited access to the best moments of millions of people's lives, while hiding all the struggle and pain and mundane reality that makes up most of existence. So when you see someone's vacation photos and feel inadequate because you haven't traveled in years, you're not seeing the credit card debt, the relationship problems, the work stress they're escaping from. When you see someone's promotion announcement and feel like a failure, you're not seeing the years of unpaid overtime, the sacrifices they made, the luck and privilege that played a role. Your brain is trying to learn and adapt by comparing, but it's working with incomplete and distorted information, and that's why the comparison hurts instead of helps. Here's another psychological phenomenon that affects almost everyone but is rarely named. You have a negativity bias, which means your brain is wired to pay more attention to negative experiences, negative feedback, and potential threats than to positive ones. You can receive 10 compliments and 1 criticism, and you'll obsess over the criticism for days while barely remembering the compliments. You can have a great day with 1 bad interaction, and that interaction will dominate your thoughts for the rest of the week. This isn't pessimism, it's evolution. For most of human history, the people who survived were the ones who paid attention to threats, who remembered dangers, who learned from mistakes and near misses. The person who remembered where the poisonous berries grew was more likely to survive than the person who focused on how beautiful the sunset was. So your brain developed this bias toward the negative as a survival mechanism. But in the modern world where most of us aren't facing life or death threats on a daily basis, this bias just makes us miserable. We ruminate on failures, we catastrophize about the future, we hold on to grudges and regrets, and we discount the good things that happen as flukes or exceptions. The way to counteract this isn't to force yourself to be positive or to suppress negative thoughts. It's to consciously practice noticing and savoring the positive experiences when they happen, to train your brain to give them the same weight and attention that it automatically gives to the negative ones. Let's talk about procrastination because I guarantee you've beaten yourself up about this more times than you can count. You put things off, you wait until the last minute, you know you're making your life harder but you do it anyway, and you've probably called yourself lazy or undisciplined or self-sabotaging because of it. But here's what research on procrastination reveals. It's almost never about laziness, it's about emotion regulation. When you procrastinate, you're not avoiding the task, you're avoiding the negative emotions that the task triggers. Maybe it's anxiety about not doing it perfectly, fear of failure, overwhelm at not knowing where to start, resentment about having to do something you don't want to do, or even fear of success and what that might mean for your life. So you choose the short-term relief of avoidance over the long-term benefit of completion, and then you feel guilty about that choice, which creates more negative emotion, which makes you want to avoid even more, and the cycle perpetuates itself. The solution isn't to shame yourself into action. It's to understand what emotion you're avoiding and address that directly. If it's perfectionism, you need to practice self-compassion and lower your standards to something more realistic. If it's overwhelm, you need to break the task into smaller pieces. If it's resentment, you need to either find a way to make the task more meaningful or accept that some things just have to be done, even if we don't want to do them. But the baseline understanding needs to be this. You're not lazy. You're stuck in an emotional regulation strategy that worked in the short term but is failing you in the long term, and with the right tools and support, you can change that pattern. Here's a behavior that might feel embarrassing, but is actually incredibly common. You rehearse conversations in the shower, in the car, while you're falling asleep, and sometimes you rehearse them so thoroughly that when the actual conversation happens, it feels anticlimactic because you've already lived it a dozen times in your head. This goes back to that mental simulation we talked about earlier, but it's worth emphasizing because a lot of people think this makes them weird or socially awkward. The truth is, if you're rehearsing conversations, it means you care about how you communicate. You want to be understood. You're thinking about how your words will land, and you're trying to prepare yourself for the emotional labor of interaction. None of that is pathological. The only time it becomes a problem is if the rehearsal prevents you from being present in the actual conversation. If you're so attached to the script in your head that you can't adapt when the other person goes off book. But the impulse to rehearse, to prepare, to think through your words before you speak them, that's not overthinking in the pathological sense. That's just conscientiousness. And in a world where people often speak without thinking, where words are thrown around carelessly and cause unnecessary harm, your tendency to rehearse is actually a strength. Let's address something that causes profound shame for a lot of people. You feel like you don't know who you are, like you don't have a stable sense of self, like you become whoever the people around you need you to be. In psychology, this is related to a concept called identity diffusion, and it's often rooted in childhood experiences where your authentic self wasn't safe or welcomed. If you grew up in an environment where you were punished for expressing your real thoughts and feelings, where you had to read the room and adjust your personality to keep the peace, where your value was contingent on meeting other people's needs, then you learned to shapeshift. You learned that survival meant being adaptable, that love meant being whatever version of yourself the other person wanted. And now as an adult, you're left with this unsettling feeling that you don't actually know who you are beneath all the masks. And here's what I want you to hear. That doesn't mean you're broken or empty or fake. It means you're so skilled at empathy and adaptation that you've lost touch with your core self. And the work now is to rediscover that core. Therapy can help, especially modalities that focus on identity exploration and self-compassion. Journaling can help, giving you a private space to express thoughts and feelings without an audience to perform for. Solitude can help, spending time alone doing things that bring you joy without worrying about anyone else's opinion. And patience can help, because building a relationship with yourself after years of abandoning yourself is slow work. But it's some of the most important work you'll ever do. Here's a fact that might bring you some comfort. You're more likable than you think you are. There's a psychological phenomenon called the liking gap, which describes the disconnect between how much we think people like us after a conversation and how much they actually like us. Research shows that after first meetings, people consistently underestimate how much the other person enjoyed their company, how positively they were perceived, how much they were liked. This happens because you have access to all of your internal anxieties and self-criticisms during the interaction. You notice every awkward pause, every stumbled word, every moment you felt stupid or boring, and you assume the other person noticed all of that too and judged you for it. But they didn't. They were too busy worrying about their own awkward pauses and stumbled words to pay that much attention to yours. And even if they did notice, they likely interpreted those moments far more charitably than you did. So if you walk away from social interactions convinced that you made a terrible impression, there's a very good chance you're wrong, and the other person actually liked you more than you think they did. Let's talk about a behavior that intersects with creativity and mental health. You have songs that get stuck in your head, sometimes for hours or days, and you can't get them out no matter how hard you try. This is called an earworm, and it happens because music activates the auditory cortex in a particularly sticky way. Repetitive melodies with simple rhythms are the most likely to become earworms because they're easy for your brain to loop, and once the loop starts, it's hard to interrupt. But here's the interesting part. Earworms are more common in people with high levels of musical training, high levels of neuroticism, and high levels of creativity. They're also more common when you're stressed or anxious or bored, which suggests that your brain might be using the earworm as a distraction from something more uncomfortable. If you want to get rid of an earworm, the most effective strategy isn't to try to suppress it, because that usually just makes it stronger. Instead, engage with it fully. Listen to the entire song from start to finish so your brain can complete the loop instead of getting stuck in the middle. Or replace it with a different song, ideally one that's even catchier, because sometimes the only way to evict an earworm is to give your brain a new tenant. Here's something that might validate a habit you felt weird about. You reread the same books or rewatch the same shows over and over, and people ask you why you don't try something new, but you keep coming back to the familiar because it brings you comfort. This is called repetition seeking, and it's a completely healthy way to regulate anxiety and create a sense of stability. When you engage with a story you already know, you don't have to expend cognitive energy on uncertainty. You know what's going to happen, you know how it's going to make you feel. And that predictability is soothing, especially if your real life feels chaotic or overwhelming. This is the same reason children want to hear the same bedtime story every night. The same reason people have comfort foods they return to when they're sad. Familiarity is regulatory. It tells your nervous system that everything is okay, that the world is still the same, that there are things you can count on. So if you've watched The Office 17 times or reread Harry Potter every year, you're not stuck or unimaginative. You're practicing a form of emotional self-care that works for you. Now let's talk about physical behaviors that have psychological roots. You pick at your skin, bite your nails, pull your hair, or engage in other repetitive body-focused behaviors, and you've probably been told to just stop, as if it's a simple choice. But these behaviors, often categorized as body-focused repetitive behaviors or BFRBs, are usually tied to anxiety, boredom, or a need for sensory stimulation. When you pick or bite or pull, you're giving your nervous system something to focus on, a physical sensation that distracts from emotional discomfort or understimulation. For some people, it's a self-soothing mechanism. For others, it's a way to achieve a sense of control or completion. And the guilt and shame that often accompany these behaviors just make them worse because now you're not just anxious, you're anxious about being anxious, and the behavior intensifies. The most effective treatments for BFRBs usually involve identifying the triggers, finding alternative behaviors that provide similar sensory input without causing damage, and practicing self-compassion instead of self-criticism. These aren't bad habits that you need to willpower your way out of. They're coping mechanisms that served a purpose once and now need to be replaced with something healthier. Here's a social behavior that causes a lot of anxiety. You overshare in conversations, especially with people you don't know well, and then you spend the next 3 days replaying the interaction and cringing at yourself for revealing too much. This usually happens for one of two reasons. Either you're a highly open person who values authenticity and vulnerability, and you assume everyone else does too, or you're unconsciously testing the relationship, throwing out personal information to see if the other person will accept you or reject you. Both of these are completely understandable, but they can lead to social awkwardness if the other person isn't ready for that level of intimacy. The solution isn't to stop being open, it's to calibrate your sharing to match the depth of the relationship. Early interactions are for breadth, not depth. You share widely, but shallowly, covering lots of topics without going too deep into any of them. As the relationship develops and trust builds, you can start to share more deeply. And if you do overshare, if you walk away from a conversation feeling exposed, remind yourself that the other person probably didn't think it was as weird as you did. And even if they did, that doesn't mean you did anything wrong. It just means you were authentic in a world that often rewards performance over honesty. Let's talk about something that affects your relationship with time. You feel like time is moving faster as you get older, like the years are slipping through your fingers, like you can't believe it's already December again, when it feels like January was just yesterday. This isn't your imagination. It's a real psychological phenomenon related to how your brain encodes memories. When you're young, everything is new, and new experiences create rich, detailed memories that make time feel expansive. But as you age, you fall into routines, and routine experiences don't create the same kind of memorable markers. Your brain essentially compresses them, filing them away as same as usual, instead of creating distinct memory entries. So when you look back on a year that was mostly routine, it feels like it passed in a blur, because there aren't many memory markers to make it feel substantial. The way to counteract this is to actively seek novelty, to break your routines, to do new things and go to new places and have new experiences, because those create the memory markers that make time feel rich and full instead of rushed and empty. Here's a behavior related to how you process information. You have to read things multiple times before they stick. You have to take notes to remember what you heard. You have to talk through ideas out loud to understand them. And you've probably felt stupid because of this, like you're slower than other people, like you should be able to absorb information faster. But here's the truth. People have different learning styles and different working memory capacities, And none of them are better or worse. They're just different. If you're someone who needs to engage with information multiple times through multiple modalities before it fully integrates, that doesn't mean you're less intelligent. It means your brain processes more thoroughly. You're not just surface scanning. You're actually encoding the information deeply, making connections, integrating it with what you already know. And that takes time. The people who seem to grasp things instantly might be good at quick recall, but that doesn't mean they understand more deeply than you do. So stop comparing your learning process to other people's, and start honoring the way your brain actually works. Let's address a belief that causes enormous suffering. You think that everyone else is handling life better than you are, that you're the only one who's struggling this much, that there's something uniquely broken about you because you find things difficult that seem easy for everyone else. This is called the spotlight effect combined with pluralistic ignorance. The spotlight effect is your tendency to overestimate how much other people notice and think about you, to assume that your struggles and flaws are obvious to everyone when in reality, most people are too busy worrying about their own lives to scrutinize yours. And pluralistic ignorance is the phenomenon where everyone is privately struggling but publicly pretending to be fine, which creates the collective illusion that everyone else is doing better than they actually are. So you're comparing your messy internal reality to everyone else's polished external presentation, and of course you're going to feel inadequate. The truth is that almost everyone is struggling in some way. Almost everyone feels like they're barely holding it together. Almost everyone is doing their best with the resources and knowledge and support they have. And the reason you don't see that is because we're all trained to hide it. But if you could see inside everyone else's mind and life the way you see inside your own, you'd realize that you're not uniquely broken. You're just uniquely visible to yourself. Here's a final behavior I want to leave you with. One that ties together so much of what we've talked about. You have an ongoing internal narrative, a voice in your head that comments on everything you do. And sometimes that voice is kind, but more often it's critical, harsh, unforgiving. It tells you that you're not good enough, that you should be doing more, that you're failing in ways big and small, and you've accepted that voice as truth, because it's been with you for so long that you can't imagine life without it. But here's what you need to understand. That voice isn't you. It's a collection of messages you internalized from the people and systems that raised you. And just because it lives in your head doesn't mean it's right. You can learn to talk to yourself differently. You can learn to be your own advocate instead of your own bully. You can learn to speak to yourself with the same compassion you'd give to a friend, the same patience you'd extend to a child, the same understanding you'd offer to anyone else who was struggling the way you are. And this isn't about toxic positivity or pretending everything is fine when it's not. It's about recognizing that cruelty doesn't motivate you to change. It just makes you feel worse about yourself. And feeling worse doesn't lead to growth. It leads to shutdown. So the work is to catch that critical voice when it shows up. To question whether what it's saying is actually true. And to consciously choose a different response, over and over again, until the new voice becomes as automatic as the old one. You deserve to be treated well by yourself. You deserve internal kindness. You deserve to live in your own mind without being constantly attacked by it. And if no one ever gave you permission to be gentle with yourself, I'm giving you that permission now. You're not weird. You're not broken. You're not too much or too little or wrong in any of the ways you've been told you're wrong. You're a human being navigating an incredibly complex world with a brain that's trying its absolute best to keep you safe, connected, and functional. And sometimes that brain does things that don't make sense on the surface, but make perfect sense when you understand the deeper psychology behind them. Every behavior we've talked about, from talking to your plants to crying at commercials to procrastinating on important tasks, they all serve a purpose. They all have roots in how you were shaped and what you learned and what you needed to survive. And yes, some of those behaviors might need to evolve or change as you grow. Some of them might not serve you anymore in the life you're trying to build. But that doesn't mean they were ever evidence of your brokenness. They were evidence of your adaptability, your resilience, your humanity. So I hope that as you move forward, you carry this with you. You are exactly as complex and contradictory and beautifully flawed as every other human being on this planet. And the things that make you feel strange are often the things that make you most deeply, authentically human. You're allowed to be all of it. The person who talks to inanimate objects and cries easily and overthinks everything and struggles with things that seem simple. You're allowed to be messy and still worthy of love and belonging. And if this video helped you see yourself with a little more compassion, if it made you feel a little less alone in your weirdness, then do me a favor. Leave a like, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, because we're building a community here of people who are willing to look honestly at the human experience without judgment, and I want you to be part of that. And if there's a specific behavior or psychological phenomenon you want me to dive into next, leave it in the comments, because I read every single one, and I'm always looking for what to explore next. Thank you for being here, for listening, for allowing yourself to be seen even if it's just in the privacy of watching this video. You're not alone, you're not strange, and you're exactly who you need to be.